Chapter 1. The trampled calling card. The torrential rain of late autumn poured down upon the Sterling estate, washing the gravel pathways into a muddy slurry, but failing to cleanse the stifling, oppressive atmosphere within the grand drawing room. Inside, the air was heavy with the cloying scent of lavender water and burning coal, a desperate attempt to ward off the chill of the Yorkshire moors. Clara Hastings stood with her spine straight, her hands clasped tightly before her faded gray woolen gown. Her face was pale, yet her brown eyes remained steadfast, refusing to shrink from Lady Stirling's disdainful gaze. She focused her eyes on a painting behind Lady Stirling to keep her composure, refusing to show the trembling that threatened to take hold of her knees. On the polished mahogany tea table, the delicate bone china cups trembled slightly, with each rumble of thunder rolling in from the Yorkshire moors. "Miss Hastings, I believe I have made myself clear," Lady Stirling said, slowly stirring her tea with a small silver spoon, the metal clicking rhythmically against the porcelain. Her voice was thin but sharp as a razor, matching the coldness of her hooded eyes. "The Stirling family requires a governess who can shape our daughters into elegant young ladies, prepared for the upcoming London season. We have no need for a bankrupt family's misfortune and scandal under our roof. The Hastings name is no longer one that commands respect, only pity, and I do not pay for pity." "My lady," Clara spoke, her voice gentle yet clear, echoing through the spacious room. She took a quiet breath, reminding herself of her father's counsel to never let them see her spirit break. "My father's debts were settled in full by the sale of his entire library of antique books in our former home. I have done nothing to compromise the honor of the Stirling family during my tenure here. The rumors spread by the Stirling ladies concerning my attempts to approach Master Julian are entirely based on a misunderstanding. It was Master Julian who cornered me in the East Corridor, and I merely sought to escape." "A misunderstanding?" Miss Amanda Stirling stood by the window, letting out a contemptuous laugh as she snapped her feather fan shut with a decisive, sharp click. She turned, her silk skirts swishing, a bankrupt scholar's daughter dressed in threadbare garments, daring to appear in the East Wing corridors just as Julian was reading. "Have you no regard for your station, Miss Hastings? You are merely a low-born governess, a paid servant, yet you dare harbor hopes of entering high society by seducing my brother. The audacity of your class never ceases to amaze me." Lady Stirling did not allow Clara to explain further. She rose, her deep blue silk gown rustling against the expensive Aubusson carpet. Walking over to Clara's small trunk in the corner of the room, she violently flipped it open and rummaged through it, throwing her neatly folded linen collars aside. Finding the bundle of letters of recommendation and old calling cards left by Clara's father, she snatched them and threw them onto the wet stone ground near the open door, where the rain was blowing in. "Leave this house immediately, Miss Hastings," Lady Stirling commanded coldly, her silk-clad heel grinding directly into the calling card bearing the Hastings name, leaving a smudge of dark dirt. "I shall write to every noble household in the county to apprise them of your character. You will never find another governess post in all of Yorkshire." Clara looked at her father's calling card trampled beneath the heel of the arrogant woman. A hot surge of humiliation rose in her throat, choking her, yet she forced herself to hold back her tears. She stepped forward slowly. She did not kneel, but bent with aristocratic grace to retrieve the mud-stained letters of recommendation. Straightening herself, she looked directly into Lady Stirling's eyes. "My character and dignity do not depend on your ladyship's groundless judgments," Clara said, her voice dropping to a cool calm. "The Stirling family may possess great wealth, but kindness cannot be purchased with gold. I wish you good day, Lady Stirling." She turned away, drawing her frayed woolen cloak over her head, and stepped out into the howling storm sweeping across the moors. She was left with but a single letter of recommendation from a family solicitor, whom her father had once helped. That letter would lead her to a place far more remote and far colder, Ashwood Manor, the seat of the notoriously ruthless Duke of Ashwood. The journey in the cramped mail coach lasted 3 days and 3 nights, a grueling ordeal for Clara. The northern wind, howling from the sea, rattled through the wooden cracks of the carriage. The muddy, rutted roads caused the coach to bounce violently, threatening to shatter what little strength remained in her weary body. The other passengers, a silent farmer smelling of sheep fat, and a talkative curate's wife who muttered prayers, paid her no mind. Clara huddled in the corner, clutching the small wooden chest containing the few relics of her late father. She remembered the peaceful days in London, when her father was alive and their small cottage was filled with the warm scent of paper, tea, and intellectual discussions. Now all had vanished like soap bubbles. She was alone, facing an uncertain future. When the twilight of the third day finally faded, the rattling coach came to a halt before the rusted iron gates of Ashwood Manor. The estate loomed through the thick Yorkshire fog like a massive grey stone fortress. Its pointed turrets pierced the leaden sky, casting a solemn, solitary, and terrifyingly grim silhouette. Stepping into the great hall, Clara immediately felt a suffocating silence. Servants move about as quietly as shadows, none daring to speak aloud. At that moment His Grace Sebastian Vance descended the grand black marble staircase. He was tall, his broad shoulders cloaked in a dusty black leather riding coat. His features were sharply chiseled, as if carved from stone, with gray eyes as cold as steel and a small scar running down his left cheek, a mark from his military campaigns on the northern borders. His presence commanded absolute authority, yet beneath his fearsome majesty lay a deep, solitary grief. Sebastian stopped before Clara, his cold gray eyes swept over her rain-soaked cloak and her hands trembling from the cold. Without uttering a word, he glanced at the letter of introduction, presented by the butler, gave a curt nod, and walked out the front door, leaving a draft of freezing wind in his wake. The butler led Clara to the small west drawing room, where Lady Beatrice, the Duke's widowed sister-in-law, sat by the fireplace. Beatrice's face was sharp, her lips permanently curled in bitterness. She scrutinized Clara with a guarded, suspicious gaze. "Are you Clara Hastings?" Beatrice spoke, her voice shrill and grating. "The Duke has agreed to give you a trial in instructing Leo. But I must warn you, the boy is mute and prone to fits of madness. Do not expect to remain at Ashwood for long. We have sent away 3 governesses this year alone." Just then, the door opened and a maid brought in a silver tray bearing a cup of dark brown herbal tea, which emitted a strong, sweet yet peculiarly pungent scent. Leo, a 7-year-old boy with unruly dark hair and large, terrified eyes, was led into the room by a footman. Upon seeing the herbal tea on the tray, Leo recoiled violently. The child shook his head frantically, clutching his head and letting out choked, silent whimpers, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "It is time for your tonic, Leo," Lady Beatrice said, her voice softening, though a cold light flashed in her eyes as she ordered the maid. "Make sure he drinks every drop." "It is for his own good." As the maid stepped closer, Leo grew increasingly hysterical. He let out a silent scream, using all his strength to shove the silver tray away. The teacup shattered on the floor, the dark liquid soaking rapidly into the expensive carpet. What a wicked, untamable child. Lady Beatrice rose instantly, her face distorted with rage. "Clara, do you see? This is your pupil. Brace yourself, for he is a beast." Clara watched in silence. She realized that the terror in Leo's eyes was not the mere stubbornness of a child. It was sheer panic, as though the herbal tea were a terrifying threat. She quietly committed this detail to memory, feeling a deep sympathy stir in her chest for the poor, defenseless boy. Chapter 2. The lullaby and the healing sketch. On her first night at Ashwood Manor, Clara was settled in a cramped and freezing attic room in the east wing. The wind from the moors rattled through a cracked window pane, causing the single candle on her table to flicker constantly, casting long, dancing shadows on the cold stone walls. Clara wrapped her thin woolen cloak tightly around herself, her hands numb with cold. Sleep eluded her. Whenever she closed her eyes, she was haunted by the silent, desperate plea in young Leo's eyes and the austere, cold face of Sebastian, the Duke. She wondered if she had traded one hell for another, but the memory of her father's resilience gave her strength. She would not flee. She would stand firm. The following morning, Clara began her first lesson in the manor's grand library. The vast room housed thousands of leather-bound volumes, filled with the scent of oak, dust, and aged paper. Leo sat huddled in a corner behind a large mahogany desk, his knees pulled tight to his chest, watching Clara with the wary, frightened eyes of a cornered animal. Clara did not force him to sit at the desk. Instead, she sat on the floor a few feet away, quietly reading a book, allowing him to grow accustomed to her presence, showing him that she posed no threat. In the afternoon, the fragile peace was shattered when Lady Beatrice entered the library with the customary cup of herbal tea. At the sight of the draft, Leo went into a frenzy. He wept silently, hurling books from the table, sweeping items to the floor, and scratching his own arms until they bled, his silent screams echoing in his chest. Lady Beatrice stood at the threshold, shouting at the servants, "Fetch the strong stable hands. Bind him, the boy is mad, he will tear the estate apart. He must be kept in chains for his own safety." Sebastian entered amidst the chaos, his riding boots clicking sharply on the floorboards. Seeing his son's panic, he stepped forward, attempting to hold the boy's shoulders. "Liu, cease this, I command you to stop." But the Duke's stern military voice and towering presence only intensified the boy's terror. Leo struggled violently, biting Sebastian's hand until it bled, then shrank into the corner, trembling uncontrollably. Sebastian stood frozen, his face turning to stone, though his gray eyes betrayed a father's deep helplessness and pain at being locked out of his son's world. He looked at his bleeding hand, his chest heaving with silent despair. At that moment, Clara Hastings stepped forward. She did not quail before the angry Duke, nor did she use force to restrain the child. Clara knelt on the cold stone floor, keeping a respectful distance so as not to startle Leo. She lowered her head to meet the child's eye level, ignoring Lady Beatrice's sneers. Then Clara began to sing. Her voice was gentle, clear, and soothing, like a cool stream on a sweltering summer day. It was an ancient lullaby of the countryside that her father had sung to her whenever she had nightmares. "Sleep, my darling, the moor wind is singing. The moon is high, guiding you home, no more darkness, no more fear, you are safe in the arms of the dawn." Clara's gentle voice echoed through the chaotic library, wrapping around the child's wounded soul like soft silk. Leo's silent weeping gradually subsided, his ragged breathing slowed, and he slowly lowered his hands, looking at Clara in dazed wonder. The storm in his eyes began to clear. Clara did not stop. She took a sheet of drawing paper and a piece of charcoal from her pocket. With swift, deft strokes, she began to sketch a small squirrel clutching a pine cone on a branch. She spoke softly as she drew, her tone warm, patient, and conversational. "Look, Leo. This little squirrel is finding his way home through the deep forest. The wind is cold and the trees are tall, but he is very brave, just like you. He knows that his home is not far away." Leo was captivated by Clara's sketches. Bit by bit, he shifted his body, crawling closer to her on his knees. His large eyes stared intently at the drawing. Choosing to trust this gentle woman, Leo reached out his small hand, timidly touching the corner of the paper, and then lightly clasped Clara's finger. The warmth of the human touch seemed to act like a gentle current, melting the thick ice of fear that imprisoned him. Clara smiled warmly, gently squeezing his hand to reassure him. Leo calmed down completely, no longer struggling or whimpering. He rested his head against Clara's knee, his breathing becoming steady and peaceful. She gently stroked his tangled dark hair, whispering warm comforts, creating a sanctuary of peace in the middle of the ruined library. Sebastian Vance stood beside them, witnessing the entire scene. His cold gray eyes widened with surprise and profound shock. Ever since his late Duchess had perished in that tragic carriage accident years ago, Leo had closed himself off, refusing to let anyone near him, including his father. Even the Duke was often helpless during the boy's fits. Yet this impoverished governess had managed to calm the child's hysteria with nothing more than a lullaby and simple sketches. He looked deep into Clara's clear brown eyes, feeling a strange warmth seep into his frozen soul, causing a stir in his chest that he had never experienced before. A silent protectiveness towards this mysterious woman began to take root in his heart, and he vowed to keep her safe. Chapter 3. Silent suspicions. Over the following days at Ashwood Manor, Clara devoted all her time and energy to Leo. She noticed a peculiar pattern. Whenever Leo did not consume the herbal tea Lady Beatrice brought, his mind was exceptionally clear, active, and receptive. The boy eagerly learned simple letters through Clara's vivid sketches, showing a quick intelligence that warmed Clara's heart. He was not mad, he was merely locked behind a wall of fear. Yet Lady Beatrice remained relentless, sending a maid twice daily to bring the tea to the schoolroom, ensuring Leo took his draft. Clara could see the anxiety return to Leo's eyes every time the maid knocked, and she knew she had to find a way to intervene. One afternoon, while the maid left the room to fetch warm water, Clara stood and walked to the schoolroom desk. She lifted the teacup, raising it to her nose. A sweet scent like honey masked a bitter, strangely metallic undertone. Clara's father had been a scholar who studied ancient herbalism, and she had been taught to recognize various plants from an early age. This scent closely resembled a low-dosage extract of foxglove or nightshade herbs that acted as strong sedatives, but if administered over a prolonged period, would cause neurological damage, severe physical degeneration, and eventual death. Clara shuddered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Leo, who was drawing peacefully in the corner. If this tea indeed contained a poison meant to destroy the child's mind, the instigator could be none other than Lady Beatrice, who stood to inherit the estate if Leo were declared unfit. Yet Clara was keenly aware of her position. She was merely an impoverished governess, possessing neither voice nor influence in this house. If she rushed to inform Duke Sebastian without absolute proof, Lady Beatrice would undoubtedly turn the accusations against her, have her dismissed or make her vanish entirely. She had to act with utmost caution and discretion. She must protect the boy, but she must also protect herself from their wrath. Clara sat beside the boy, whispering in her warmest voice. "You do not wish to drink this, do you?" Leo looked up at her, nodding frantically, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for help. "Very well, from now on we shall play a secret game." Clara winked at him, placing a finger over her lips. "Whenever this tea is brought, we shall make it appear as though you have drunk every drop. It will be our little secret." Clara retrieved an empty glass ink bottle from her trunk. She carefully drained a portion of the tea into it, hiding it deep beneath her belongings to serve as evidence. The remainder she poured directly into the glowing coals of the fireplace when no one was looking. With a sharp hiss, the dark liquid evaporated into a thin, foul-smelling wisp of smoke, the blue flames licking the grate. She then placed the empty cup back onto the silver tray. When Lady Beatrice entered the room to inspect, she saw the empty cup and a smug, satisfied smile touched her lips. "Very good," Beatrice said, her malicious gaze sweeping over Clara. "It seems you know how to make him take his medicine. Remember, this is a tonic the Duke purchased from London to cure his muteness. If he does not drink it, you shall be held accountable, and I will personally see you thrown out." "I understand my duty, my lady," Clara replied with a low bow, her submissive posture hiding the storm of suspicion and anger in her heart. That evening, Sebastian summoned Clara to his study. The room smelled of pine wood, beeswax, and candlelight. The Duke stood before a large military map, the lamplight casting stern shadows across his chiseled features. "Miss Hastings," Sebastian spoke, his deep voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am told that Leo has taken his tonic without protest lately. How did you achieve this?" Clara took a step forward, maintaining the proper distance of a governess. She answered carefully, "Your Grace, I merely used drawings to distract Master Leo, allowing him to forget the unpleasant taste of the medicine. Young children are often sensitive to strong odors. I believe gentle patience is far more effective than force. A child's mind is like a delicate leaf, it must be handled with care." Sebastian turned to look at her, his gray eyes piercing, as if seeking to read her innermost soul. Clara kept her breathing steady, her gaze honest, yet revealing none of her suspicions about Lady Beatrice. She knew the Duke was a sharp, suspicious man. A single misstep would ruin her investigation. "Patience," Sebastian repeated the word, a trace of self-derision in his tone. "Ashwood is not a place accustomed to patience, but if your methods are effective, you may proceed. I shall double your wages starting this month, Miss Hastings. You have done more for him than anyone else. Thank you for your Grace's generosity." Clara bowed. "I desire only Master Leo's recovery." Clara's clever composure under pressure successfully concealed the secret of the poisoned tea, while gradually building the cold Duke's trust. Sebastian watched her leave, his eyes lingering on the doorway long after she had gone, a silent warmth softening his stern features. Chapter 4. The ball and the declaration in the spotlight winter passed swiftly, yielding to the warm breezes of spring. The cold snow on the Yorkshire moors melted, revealing green shoots of life. Ashwood Manor hosted a grand ball to welcome local gentry and several families visiting from London. It was the first major social event since Clara's arrival at Ashwood, and the entire estate was busy with preparations. As the governess of the Heir, Clara possessed no right to dance in the main ballroom. She was required to stand in the area designated for servants and chaperones at the periphery of the room, ready to tend to Leo should he appear. She wore her simplest pale gray silk gown, her brown hair neatly swept up, adorned with no jewelry. Nonetheless, her porcelain skin, her natural grace, and her regal upright posture exuded an unmistakable elegance that drew the eyes of many. The ballroom was flooded with light from hundreds of candles on massive crystal chandeliers. The orchestra's music resounded merrily. Ladies in vibrantly colored silk gowns and elegant gentlemen spun across the polished floor. Sebastian Vance appeared in exquisite black evening attire. The golden ducal crest gleamed upon his chest. He conversed calmly with his guests, yet his gray eyes occasionally drifted to the corner where Clara stood in solitude, looking like a pearl among common stones. According to the strict class decorum of the Regency nobility, a duke could not invite a poor governess to dance during an official ball without provoking a massive scandal. Sebastian understood this well, He restrained himself, refraining from approaching her, to shield her from the scrutiny of high society, though his heart pulled him toward her. Yet trouble sought Clara nonetheless. The Sterling family was also in attendance. When Lady Sterling and Miss Amanda saw Clara standing in the corner, their faces contorted with anger and disdain. Amanda Sterling deliberately led a group of high-born, giggling young ladies toward Clara. "Oh, look whom we have found here," Amanda spoke aloud, her mocking tone designed to draw the attention of the surrounding crowd. "A thief expelled from the Sterling house, yet she manages to slip into the Duke of Ashwood's ball? Since when does Ashwood welcome such low-born interlopers? Perhaps she is looking for another brother to seduce." The eyes of the guests turned toward Clara, and hushed whispers broke out. Clara felt the sting of their looks, but she held her chin high. "Miss Amanda, I am here as the governess personally employed by the Duke to instruct Master Leo." "I did not slip in," Clara replied calmly. "Governess." Lady Sterling stepped forward, her voice shrill and venomous. "Miss Hastings, do you truly believe a change of employment can erase your past of seducing men for gold? A bankrupt scholar's daughter, without a single shilling of dowry to her name, daring to stand in the same room as respectable ladies. It is an insult to the entire gentry of Yorkshire. You belong in the kitchen, not the ballroom." Amanda Sterling raised her glass of red wine, tilting it deliberately so that the dark red liquid splashed onto Clara's gray gown, leaving a stained blotch like blood across her chest. "My apologies, a slip of the hand," Amanda laughed triumphantly, her fan fluttering. "But perhaps this red suits your pathetic appearance." Clara froze, her fingers clenching her stained skirt. Humiliation burned in her chest, turning her eyes red, yet she resolutely refused to bow her head or shed a tear before her tormentors. She stood like a statue of marble, proud and unbroken. At that moment, the ballroom music came to an abrupt halt. A tall, imposing figure strode through the crowd. Sebastian Vance approached, his features cold as ice, his gray eyes radiating an overwhelming, lethal authority that silenced the whisperers instantly. He walked straight to Clara, ignored the crowd, and glanced at the stain on her dress. Sebastian removed his black velvet cloak, embroidered with gold thread, and gently draped it over Clara's trembling shoulders, concealing the stain. His action was exceedingly gentle, yet his face was terrifyingly cold as he turned to Lady Sterling. "Lady Sterling," Sebastian's deep, resonant voice echoed in the absolute silence of the ballroom. "Ashwood Manor is not a marketplace for cheap gossip. Miss Hastings is the governess of the sole heir of the House of Vance. She is a lady of intellect and honor. Miss Hastings is under my protection. Whoever insults her challenges the honor of the House of Vance, and my own. Servants, escort the Sterling family from the Ashwood estate immediately. From this night forth, Ashwood shall not welcome any member of the Sterling line. You are banned from my sight." Sebastian's iron command struck like a thunderbolt. The entire ballroom was deeply shocked. Wine glasses trembled in the hands of the guests. None dared speak or breathe heavily before the silent wrath of England's most formidable duke. Lady Sterling and Amanda Sterling stood bloodless and trembling, unable to utter a word as they were escorted out by the estate's footmen, thoroughly humiliated before hundreds of high society onlookers. Clara stood behind Sebastian, gazing at his broad, sturdy shoulders and his commanding back. The warmth of his gold-embroidered velvet cloak enveloped her, banishing the chill of humiliation and soothing her wounded heart. In that quiet moment, amidst the brilliant candlelight, Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew that whatever lay ahead, her life from this second forth was forever bound to this cold yet noble man who had stood for her when no one else would. Chapter 5. The first stroke 3 weeks after that fateful ball, the atmosphere at Ashwood Manor seemed to have lost some of its cold, oppressive gloom. The dark stone corridors, once smelling of damp earth and neglect, were now aired out, letting in the sweet fragrance of blooming cherry blossoms and wild heather from the surrounding moors. The stain on Clara's gray gown had been washed clean, but Sebastian's black velvet cloak, embroidered with gold, was hung prominently in her wardrobe like a priceless treasure. Every time her hand brushed against the soft fabric, a shiver of warmth went through her, and she recalled the solid protective presence of the Duke standing between her and her tormentors. On a bright, clear morning, Clara sat beside Leo's large mahogany desks in the schoolroom. Warm spring sun shone through the tall Gothic windows, casting bright geometric shapes on the floor and illuminating the charcoal drawings of birds, squirrels, and woodland creatures that lined the walls. Leo sat beside her, his dark eyes focused intensely on a slate board. Under Clara's patient, gentle guidance, He was striving to form letters with white chalk, his small fingers moving with steady, quiet progress. The chalk made a soft scratching sound in the quiet room. "Very good, Leo." Clara smiled warmly, her voice like a soft caress as she gently smoothed his unruly dark hair. "You have formed the letters perfectly. Look how straight the lines are. Now let us try to write a complete word. Just take your time, there is no rush." Just then the schoolroom door opened. Sebastian Vance entered. He was not dressed in his formal, intimidating ducal attire, but wore a simple white linen shirt and a black woolen waistcoat, presenting a more approachable yet no less commanding figure. The lack of his formal cravat revealed the strong lines of his throat, and the morning sun highlighted the silver threads at his temples. His sudden entrance startled Clara, who stood quickly, her skirts rustling, to curtsy. "Good morning, Your Grace." Sebastian waved his hand dismissively, his gray eyes resting immediately on his son's face, which was healthier, brighter, and more colored than before. He walked slowly to the desk, his heavy boots silent on the carpet, and froze upon seeing the slate. Seeing his father, Leo no longer showed the paralyzing fear that had once defined him. He looked up, his dark eyes shining with anticipation, and smiled a radiant gap-toothed smile, something Sebastian had not witnessed since his late wife's tragic passing. Then, with small hands trembling with emotion, Leo held the chalk and carefully wrote each letter upon the slate, checking Clara's face for encouragement. "Clara." The letters appeared clearly on the black slate. It was the first word the heir of Ashwood had written after years of absolute, terrifying silence. He had not written his father's name, nor the grand name of the House of Vance, but her name, the poor, bankrupt scholar's governess who had calmed his hysteria with a lullaby and saved him from his isolation. Sebastian Vance stood rooted to the spot, deeply shaken. His broad military shoulders trembled, and an unprecedented, overwhelming emotion welled in his chest. He stared at the word Clara on the slate, then turned to her, his gaze filled with awe, astonishment, and a profound respect he could not conceal. The steel gray of his eyes was entirely gone, replaced by a vulnerable warmth. "Leo," Sebastian whispered, his deep, commanding voice cracking with a father's love. He knelt beside his son's chair, heedless of the dust on the floor, and embraced his small shoulders. Leo buried his head in his father's shoulder, his arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Clara watched them, tears pricking her eyes at the sight of the father and son finally reconnecting, the thick ice of their shared grief melting away in the spring sun. Rising, Sebastian looked directly at Clara. The coldness on his face had vanished, replaced by the deep reverence and gratitude of a father who had been given a miracle. "Miss Hastings," Sebastian spoke, his voice warmer and more sincere than ever. "I believed Leo would remain forever locked in his silent, dark world. Previous tutors saw my son only as a mad child to be subdued, but you saw his soul. You saw the boy he was meant to be. You have returned my son to me, and for that, I am forever in your debt." "Your Grace," Clara bowed, her cheeks flushing a delicate rose in the sunlight, her heart beating rapidly. "Master Leo is an intelligent child with a sensitive, beautiful heart. He requires only patience, gentle understanding, and genuine love, not sedatives and chains. He wants to please you, and he loves you deeply." Sebastian stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He stood so near that Clara could catch the scent of pine, winter air, and candle wax on his clothes. He looked down into her clear, honest brown eyes, his voice soft yet resolute, vibrating with an unspoken tension. "From this day forth, Miss Hastings, you are not merely a governess at Ashwood. You are the greatest benefactor to myself and the House of Vance. Whatever you require, you have only to ask. I shall not permit anyone in this house to treat you with less than the utmost respect. You are home here, Clara." The Duke's respect and his soft pronunciation of her name was the greatest reward for Clara's dignity and effort, sparking a tender, unspoken affection between two solitary souls, who had found comfort and light in each other's presence. Chapter 6. The sudden storm. The peace of Ashwood was not to last. Lady Beatrice began to notice the distinct, undeniable change in Leo. He was no longer listless, fearful, and easy to control, but grew stronger, more active, and began to write. Furthermore, the bond between Sebastian and the governess Clara grew closer after the ball, and Leo's writing on the slate. Beatrice could see her dreams of controlling the estate and securing the vast Vance fortune slipping away. In her dark, cluttered chambers, smelling of heavy musk and stale lavender, she stared at the piles of debt letters from London creditors, her heart racing with panic. She resolved to act swiftly to banish Clara and execute her plot before the Duke discovered the truth. One weekend afternoon, while Clara traveled by carriage to the village to purchase school books and drawing supplies for Leo at Sebastian's request, Ashwood Manor grew quiet. The carriage ride was peaceful, the spring breeze carrying the scent of fresh earth and green grass across the Yorkshire hills, and Clara felt a rare happiness, her thoughts constantly drifting back to Sebastian's warm words in the library. She visited the small bookstore in the village, run by an elderly man who had once bought some of her father's scholarly catalogue papers. The kind bookseller had smiled and given her a discount, remembering the late scholar Hastings with high esteem. That brief encounter warmed her heart, reminding her that her family's name still held a gentle dignity in the quiet corners of the county. Duke Sebastian was also occupied with estate affairs, meeting with his land solicitor in the northern study, far from the west wing. Seizing the opportunity, Lady Beatrice personally carried a tray with a special herbal tea into Leo's schoolroom. Her face was heavily painted, yet her eyes shone with cold, desperate cruelty. "Dear Leo," Beatrice smiled, her voice falsely sweet, though her fingers clutched the cup tightly. She pressed the teacup to the boy's lips, her sharp fingernails digging slightly into his shoulder. "Your dear governess is not home today to protect you. It is time for your tonic, drink this, or I shall ensure she leaves this place forever, and you will never see her again. She will be cast out into the cold moors to starve." Terrified, Leo looked around frantically for Clara, his breath catching in his throat, but she was nowhere to be found. Threatened with Clara's expulsion, the boy wept silently, his small body trembling as he took the cup. Beatrice forced him to drink the entirety of the thick, dark, sweet yet bitter liquid, watching him with a cold, triumphant smile as he choked on the last drop. When Clara returned to Ashwood Manor at sunset, the sky was painted in long, ominous streaks of crimson. She immediately sensed a chaotic, tense atmosphere. Maids ran through the stone corridors in panic, carrying basins of water, and footmen rode out in haste to summon the physician from the village. Clara ran to Leo's schoolroom, her heart pounding with a sudden terrible dread. The door was wide open, revealing a sight that made her heart stop. Leo lay on his small bed, his face flushed with high fever, his eyes tightly closed, his breathing shallow and weak. His small body convulsed slightly and a cold sweat covered his brow. Lady Beatrice stood by the bedside, her expression furious yet triumphant. Seeing Clara enter, she pointed a finger at her and screamed so all the servants gathered in the hallway could hear, "Here is the poisoner, seize her. She has tried to kill my nephew." Clara was shocked, her mind racing to comprehend the scene. "Lady Beatrice, what are you saying? What has happened to Master Leo? He was perfectly well when I left. You dare play this innocent?" Beatrice hissed, turning to the butler and the servants gathered at the door. "I entered the room to find Leo unconscious beside his tonic cup. My maid, Sarah, witnessed Miss Hastings slipping a white powder into Leo's tea jar before she left for the village. She is the one who poisoned the heir of Ashwood to hide her incompetence." "I did no such thing," Clara denied resolutely, her eyes flashing with anger at the blatant slander. She refused to let her voice shake. "I have cared for Master Leo with all my heart. I would never harm him, while you have always despised him. The word of a bankrupt scholar's daughter carries no weight here." Beatrice sneered, her voice rising to a shriek. "Servants, lock her in the eastern attic. Tomorrow we shall hand her to the magistrate to hang this poisoner. Do not let her escape." The servants hesitated, looking at one another, knowing Clara's gentleness. But under the authoritative pressure and threats of Lady Beatrice, they began to step toward Clara to arrest her. Clara clenched her fists, standing tall to defend her dignity, her eyes fixed on Beatrice with deep resentment, refusing to show fear even as the shadows closed in. Chapter 7. The investigation in the shadows unhand her. A cold, commanding voice resounded from the doorway, cutting through Lady Beatrice's hysterics. Sebastian Vance entered, his black woolen cloak billowing behind him, smelling of rain and the wild moors. His features were grim, his steel-gray eyes scanning the chaotic room and locking onto the servants who had dared to step toward Clara. They recoiled instantly. The family physician had just arrived, rushing to the bedside to attend to Leo, who lay shivering on the bed, his forehead burning. "Sebastian." Lady Beatrice immediately stepped forward, her voice filled with feigned anguish and false tears, her handkerchief pressed to her eyes. "It is monstrous. Clara Hastings, the governess whom we trusted, has poisoned Leo. I discovered the poison in his tea and caught her red-handed. Order the servants to bind her and throw her into the dungeon immediately before she harms anyone else." Sebastian glanced at Clara. She stood there, her cloak dusty from the road, her face pale under the candlelight, yet her brown eyes met his with steadfast integrity. She did not weep, nor did she look like a guilty soul. She stood tall, her spine straight, refusing to break under the weight of the false accusation. "No one is to lay a hand on Miss Hastings," Sebastian commanded coldly, his tone permitting no defiance. "If anyone touches her, they will answer to me, but Sebastian—" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "She is a murderer. She tried to kill your son." "At Ashwood, my word is the law." Sebastian turned to Beatrice, his gaze so sharp and icy it made her shrink back in silence, her hand dropping from her face. "The physician has yet to reach a final conclusion. Pending the investigation, Mrs. Hastings shall be moved to large guest chamber on the second floor, under my direct supervision. No one is to approach or question her without my consent. Anyone who disobeys will be dismissed instantly." Sebastian shielded Clara from Beatrice's accusations and prevented her arrest by the local authorities. He escorted her to the luxurious guest room himself, a spacious chamber with gold silk hangings, a soft velvet-draped bed, and a large fireplace. He locked the door from the outside, but it was to protect her from Beatrice's reach, while ensuring she was provided with coal for the fireplace and warm tea to ward off the cold. As Clara sat by the window, watching the dark clouds gather over the moors, she felt a strange mix of fear and comfort. For the first time in months, she was in a warm room that did not leak, yet she was technically a prisoner. She stared at the crackling orange fire, thinking of the Duke's steel-gray eyes, which had flashed with such intense protectiveness when he entered the schoolroom. She knew she was in the midst of a dangerous family war, but she trusted him completely. Late that night, when the manor was silent and only the wind howled outside, Sebastian unlocked the door and entered Clara's room. He stood before the fireplace, the flames casting flickers of light across his solemn, tired face. "Miss Hastings," Sebastian asked in a low, quiet voice. "I require the truth. Did you put anything in Leo's tea?" Clara walked to him, her gaze unwavering. Without hesitation, she retrieved the small glass vial containing the dark brown liquid from her chest, the poisoned tea she had hidden. "Your Grace, here is my answer." Clara placed the vial on the table. "For months, I noticed that Master Leo was terrified of the herbal tea Lady Beatrice brought. I quietly saved a portion of it each day and disposed of the rest to protect him. It was only after he ceased drinking this tea that his health began to improve. Today, in my absence, Lady Beatrice forced him to drink a large dose. My father was a scholar of botany, and he taught me to recognize the plants of the moors. This liquid smells of digitalis." Sebastian picked up the glass vial, staring at the dark liquid. His gray eyes narrowed in shock, and a look of dawning horror crossed his features. He realized the truth. It is a high-dosage extract of foxglove, Your Grace. It acts to dull the mind and render the child simple-minded if administered long-term. I beg you to have the physician examine this immediately. I only wanted to save him, even if it meant risking my own life." Sebastian clenched the vial so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked directly into Clara's eyes, realizing the extraordinary loyalty and courage of this poor governess who had risked all to protect his son. He felt a deep surge of emotion, a desire to protect her from the world. "I understand," Sebastian spoke, his voice laced with a terrifying quiet rage. "Remain in this room. I shall investigate the truth myself. You are safe, Clara, I promise you. No harm will come to you under my roof." Chapter 8. Words from the brink of death. Leo's fever raged through the night. Refusing to remain in the safety of the guest room, Clara begged Sebastian to allow her to watch over the child. Seeing her sincerity and the deep love she had for his sons, Sebastian consented. Throughout the long, cold night, Clara did not leave Leo's side. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked slowly, counting the agonizing seconds. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting a warm orange glow that fought against the creeping chill of the Yorkshire winter moors. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded beast, and frost began to lace the corners of the window panes. Clara constantly changed the warm compresses on his forehead, wiping his sweat-slicked brow with a lavender-scented cloth and whispering gentle comforts into the ears of the delirious child. Sebastian sat in the armchair opposite, silently observing the slender girl devotedly tending to his son. He noticed her pale skin, the dark circles of exhaustion beneath her eyes, and the quiet resilience in her posture. His hand twitched with a silent urge to comfort her, to ease the burden she had so willingly taken on, yet he restrained himself, respecting her dedication. Clara's tenderness and resilience under the dim candlelight thoroughly warmed the long-frozen heart of the notoriously ruthless Duke. He saw in her a strength that matched his own, a rare light in the dark. By dawn, the storm outside began to die down, leaving a thick blanket of white snow on the moors, and Leo's heavy breathing began to stabilize. His fever subsided and his small fingers twitched, searching for comfort. Leo slowly opened his eyes. Seeing the anxious faces of Clara and his father, the child smiled weakly, his eyes clear and free of fever. "Leo," Clara cried joyfully, tears of relief spilling down her cheeks as she gently raised his head to give him a sip of fresh water. "You are awake, thank heavens you are safe." Sebastian stepped quickly to the bedside, grasping his son's hand in his own large palms. His gray eyes shone with immense relief, a rare softness appearing on his stern face. The family physician entered the room, having examined the liquid in the vial provided by Sebastian. He bowed, his voice trembling with gravity. "Your Grace, the test results of the liquid in the vial match the toxin found in Master Leo's stomach. It is a high-dose extract of foxglove, which causes slow heart rate, confusion, and convulsions. Had it not been for Miss Hastings regularly disposing of the tea, and her timely intervention today, the young master might not have survived the night." A heavy silence fell upon the room, thick with the realization of the crime. Sebastian turned to his son, his voice softening yet remaining resolute. "Leo, my brave son. You have been very strong. Can you tell me who forced you to drink that tea today?" Leo looked at his father, then at Clara. The child recalled the letters and sign language Clara had taught him to communicate. He raised his weak hands, interlocking his thumbs to form the shape of a small crown, the sign he always used to represent the arrogant, dominating Lady Beatrice. Then, with a monumental effort that overcame his physical paralysis, Leo parted his dry lips. From the throat of the child who had been mute for years came a raspy, weak, but unmistakable sound. "Beatrice." The word echoed in the quiet room like a death sentence for the culprit. Leo had explicitly named Lady Beatrice as the one who poisoned him to secure the Vance inheritance. Sebastian Vance rose, his face as cold as a judging deity from the underworld. His gray eyes burned with a lethal fury, ready to destroy the one who had dared harm his only son. He turned to Clara, his deep voice carrying absolute power. "It is time to bring the truth to light. Come with me, Clara, today. We end this." Chapter 9. Justice in the light. The following morning, the great hall of Ashwood Manor was bathed in cold, clear morning light. Sebastian Vance had ordered all servants of the estate to assemble. From the lowest kitchen maid to the high-ranking housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, alongside them stood the family physician, the family solicitor in his black robes, and the local magistrate Mercer. Thomas, who administered the law in Yorkshire with a stern, unyielding hand. The servants stood in hushed groups, their murmurs echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling, the air tense with anticipation. Lady Beatrice entered the hall with immense pride, her black silk dress swishing on the stone floor. She wore her most luxurious gown, her face heavily powdered to hide her exhaustion, confident that today the lowly governess Clara Hastings would be led away in chains, leaving her plans to control the Vance fortune intact. She smiled mockingly at the servants, who bowed their heads in fear. "Sebastian," Beatrice spoke, her voice carrying a trace of feigned reproach as she saw Clara standing quietly beside the Duke. "Why is the magistrate here, and why is she not yet bound? Poor Leo still lies on his sickbed while the culprit remains free. It is a scandal that stains the Vance name." Sebastian Vance did not answer immediately. He stood on the raised dais of the great hall, his steel-gray eyes sweeping over the assembled crowd. His silence created an oppressive, suffocating pressure, causing the whispers of the servants to die out instantly. The tension in the air was thick, Mr. Thomas. Sebastian turned to the magistrate, his voice resonant, cold, and decisive. "I have invited you here today to bear witness to the attempted murder of the sole heir of the House of Vance." "Of course, Your Grace." Mr. Thomas bowed respectfully. "We have prepared the warrant of arrest for Miss Hastings." "The person you must arrest is not Miss Hastings." Sebastian took a step forward, shielding Clara. He pointed directly at Lady Beatrice, but the woman standing there, Lady Beatrice Vance. The hall erupted in loud murmurs. Beatrice's expression faltered, her face turning pale beneath her thick powder, yet she tried to raise her voice, clutching her pearls. "Sebastian! What madness is this? She is the one who poisoned Leo's tea. My maid saw her clearly. You are being deceived by a common servant's lies. Your maid confessed to the entire truth last night, after my solicitor uncovered the massive debt letters you sent to moneylenders in London." Sebastian cast a bundle of documents and letters onto the large oak table in the center of the hall. You mortgaged your entire share of the inheritance, and the only way to avoid debtor's prison was to make Leo vanish or render him simple-minded, so you could control the Ashwood estate under the guise of guardianship. You targeted my son to save yourself. No. This is a blatant fabrication. Beatrice screamed, her voice trembling with panic, her eyes darting to the doors. Where is the proof? No one will believe the word of a servant. At that moment, the double doors of the hall swung open. Clara Hastings entered, leading Leo by the hand. Though still somewhat weak, the boy's eyes were clear, alert, and filled with life. Leo walked to his father's side, holding Clara's hand tightly, showing the entire household that he was recovered. Before the magistrate, the solicitor, and all the assembled servants, Leo took his slate, wrote the name Beatrice in bold white chalk, and pointed his small finger at his widowed aunt. He interlocked his thumbs to form the small crown sign, the sign unique to her, indicating she was the one who had forced him to drink. The physician has also confirmed that the poison in your teacup matches the toxin that has ravaged Leo's body for months. Sebastian spoke coldly, his tone as hard as tempered steel. Lady Beatrice, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of the heir of Ashwood. You will be taken to York Castle. Mr. Thomas signaled the officers to step forward. Lady Beatrice collapsed entirely, weeping and screaming hysterically as she was handcuffed and dragged from the great hall of Ashwood Manor before everyone. Justice was finally served, and the true face of the villain was brought into the light, leaving the hall in a peaceful silence. Chapter 10. A sincere proposal in the Heir's voice. A month after the storm, Ashwood Manor regained its inherent peace. Thanks to Clara's dedicated care and the complete cessation of the poisoned tea, Leo's health improved miraculously. The boy was now able to walk, run in the garden, and write many more words than before. One warm afternoon, when the first roses of the season in the estate's garden began to bloom, Sebastian Vance sent a request for Clara to meet him in the grand study. As Clara stepped into the room, she saw Sebastian standing by the window, the setting sun painting his broad shoulders and sharp features in crimson light. The room was filled with the scent of oak and a warm silence. Miss Hastings, Sebastian turned, his gray eyes looking at her with immense tenderness, stripped of the sharp coldness from before. Please sit. Clara sat in the leather armchair opposite his desk. On the desk, she noticed a marriage settlement document already prepared, sealed with the red wax of the family solicitor. Her heart skipped a beat, pounding in her chest. Your Grace, Clara spoke, her voice trembling slightly. You summoned me for a matter? Sebastian walked over to stand in front of her, then slowly knelt on one knee beside her chair, a gesture of profound respect and humility from a duke of the highest standing in England, who had never knelt before anyone save the king. He took her small hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor, enveloping and holding them firmly within his large, warm palms. Sebastian called her name in a low, deep voice, carrying a raw gentleness never before revealed to anyone. I invited you here today not as a duke delegating work to a governess, but as an ordinary man bowing his head to beg for salvation from the only woman he loves with all his soul. Clara looked straight into his deep gray eyes, where the cold ice had completely melted under the warm spring sun. Her brown eyes welled with emotional tears, her voice shaking with choked happiness. Sebastian. Your Grace, my life was once a dark and lonely ice chamber, walled by suspicion after the betrayals of my own blood. Sebastian gently caressed the back of her hand, his voice unusually warm. But you stepped into that gloomy world, bringing a gentle lullaby, drawings full of life, and extraordinary courage to save Leo from the abyss of silence. You did not just save my son, Clara. You pulled my tattered soul back into the light. I fell in love with you from those simple moments. I loved how you fiercely held on to your dignity when society trampled upon you. I loved your great patience for my poor child, and I loved your holy, steadfast soul. He glanced towards the exquisite marriage settlement on the desk. This is the marriage contract I drafted myself with the Vance family solicitor. It guarantees you a massive annual pin money to ensure you are financially independent, full control over the management of Ashwood Manor, and a separate inheritance that no one in the royal family or the courts can interfere with. I do not want you to marry as a recipient of charity. I want you to have an equal status and the supreme protection before the entire world. Sebastian looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with intense anticipation and utmost sincerity. Clara Hastings, will you grant me the honor of becoming my wife, the Duchess of Ashwood, to care for Leo with me and share all the bitterness and sweetness of this life? Tears of happiness, after so many days of enduring humiliation and pain, finally rolled down Clara's cheeks. She nodded gently, squeezing the Duke's rough hand with all the affection buried in her heart. "I do, Sebastian. I agree to be your wife, your Duchess, to walk with you through all the storms of life." Sebastian stood up, gently drawing Clara against his solid, warm chest. He wrapped his large arms tightly around her, placing a respectful, tender kiss upon his wife's forehead. The Duke's sincere proposal not only granted Clara the highest aristocratic status, but was also the sweetest recognition and compensation for her proud dignity after those dark days. A week later, Sebastian decided to host a grand engagement banquet at Ashwood Manor. He invited the entire Yorkshire nobility, along with several influential guests from London, to attend, publicly announcing his marriage and asserting Clara's firm position. The ball was lavish under the light of thousands of wax candles. However, the atmosphere was not free from the whispering scrutiny of the snobbish guests. They gathered in small groups, relentlessly gossiping about Clara Hastings' poor background. "What is the Duke thinking, elevating a poor governess to be the mistress of Ashwood?" Lady Arlington whispered with a sneer. "A woman with no family name, no dowry, how can she bear the crown of the Vance family?" Amanda Sterling, who had always been envious of Clara, sneaked into the party and chimed in. "She is merely a lowly servant who used tricks to entice the mute child and seduce the Duke to change her life." The malicious rumors circulated throughout the grand ballroom, creating a cold wall of isolation around Clara as she entered. Dressed in an elegant emerald silk satin gown, Clara maintained a calm, proud demeanor, yet her hands tightened slightly under the heavy pressure of social prejudice. Just as the whispers grew loudest, the double doors of the ballroom swung wide open. Young Leo walked in, dressed in a very formal little suit. The boy no longer wore his former melancholy and fear. Instead, he walked with confidence, heading straight toward Clara, who stood amidst the hostile gazes. Leo reached Clara's side. Before the breathtaking astonishment of all the guests, the boy took Clara's small hand, then raised his head to look directly at the whispering crowd of nobles. Leo took a breath and spoke clearly and loudly for the first time in his life. "She saved me." The entire ballroom fell into absolute silence. Every feather fan froze mid-air, and wineglasses hovered in the hands of the gentlemen. The mute child of the Vance family, the heir everyone assumed was crippled and unable to communicate, had spoken his first words, clear and distinct, to defend his governess. Leo squeezed Clara's hand, continuing with a child's pure sincerity. "Miss Clara saved me from the darkness. I want her to be my mother." Tears of emotion rolled down Clara's cheeks. She knelt down. Holding Leo tightly in her arms, Sebastian Vance stepped to their side. He drew himself up, shielding them both, his cold gray eyes sweeping across the ballroom, silencing any who dared to breathe. "Listen well, ladies and gentlemen." Sebastian's voice, though low, commanded the room. "The kind heart and courage of Clara Hastings brought a second life to my son, and light back to the Vance family. She is the savior of Ashwood, and as of today she is my only lawful future Duchess. Anyone who dares to insult her dignity declares war against the entire House of Vance." The Duke's ironclad declaration, combined with the miraculous voice of the young heir Leo, struck like a thunderbolt, shattering all the gossip. Lady Arlington and Amanda Sterling went pale, bowing their heads as they slunk back into the shadows in utter disgrace. Instantly, the guests in the room bowed respectfully, raising their glasses in unison to toast the proud future Duchess of Ashwood. The perfect status reversal had taken place right in the sanctuary of the Vance family. Under the brilliant golden sunset of Yorkshire shining through the large glass window, Sebastian held Clara's hand with young Leo smiling brightly by their side. Clara Hastings had triumphed over class prejudice and dark schemes, not by a hollow title, but by her own sincere love, proud dignity, and courageous heart, opening a complete dawn of happiness forever after at Ashwood Manor.